Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning everybody. And this is July 21st, right? 2012. The birth anniversary of my teacher, actually, one of my teachers, Venerable Nyanaponika Mahathera, who would have been 111 years old today. Yeah. Okay, so today we'll be starting Sutta number 77 in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is called Mahasahaludayi Sutta, the longer discourse to Udayi, or Sakuludayin. Just get the beginning, and it begins on page 629. Okay, this sutta begins in a very similar way to the sutta that we examined last week, except here it's not Venerable Ananda, but it's the Buddha himself who enters the town a bit too early to go wandering for alms. And here the Buddha is in the bamboo grove. He's staying in the bamboo grove, which is a little bit outside the city of Rajagaha. And so the Buddha decides to go into the city of Rajagaha on his alms round, and probably when he reaches the outskirts of the city, he sees that it's still too early to walk for alms, and so he decides to go to a place called the Peacock Sanctuary. It must have been a place where peacocks would gather. Not only peacocks, but also wandering ascetics would gather there. Maybe in an earlier time the peacocks gathered there, but then it became attractive to wandering ascetics. And so they would go and gather there and have discussions. Probably they had some pavilions where the ascetics would stay overnight. And so the Buddha approaches, he goes to this wanderer's park, and as in the previous sutta, when the Buddha arrives, this time it's the wanderer Sakuludayi, who's sitting together with a large group of wanderers, and according to the stock passage, how does it go? They are making an uproar, loudly and noisily talking many kinds of pointless talk, such as talk of kings, heroes, some of the other topics. Kings, robbers, ministers, armies, dangers, food, battles, food, drink, clothes, some so and so and so on, cities, countries, women's heroes, the origin of the world, the origin of the sea, whether things are so or not so. Okay, then as the Buddha approaches, the wanderer Sakuludayi tells his own assembly to be quiet in the hope that the Buddha will join them. And so the Buddha comes and approaches Sakuludayi. The wanderer Sakuludayi welcomes him, offers him a seat, and then after the Buddha is seated, now we turn the page to 630, the Buddha asks Sakuludayi, "What was the discussion that you were having when I arrived?" And Sakuludayi now tells the Buddha, he says, let be, just put aside the discussion that we were having as we were sitting together. They might have been talking about which king is getting married to the sister of which prince, and so on. And so maybe he's too embarrassed to bring up that subject of conversation in the presence of the Buddha. And so he opens a new topic of discussion. And he says, recently, when recluses and Brahmins of various sects have been gathering together and sitting together, this topic has arisen. And now he's referring to a situation that had occurred at the time. He says, it's a gain for the people of Anga and Magadha. It's a great gain for the people of Anga and Magadha that these recluses and Brahmins, heads of orders, heads of groups, teachers of groups, well-known and famous founders of sects, regarded by many as saints or holy men. I think the word here is sadhu, which is still used in India to designate a saintly person or a holy man. So all of these great teachers have come to spend the rains retreat at Rajagaha. As I've mentioned previously, in the North India has three main climates, well, three main seasons. There is the hot season. Well, let's start with the cool season, which starts from November, 4 months, November, December, January, February, till about the first half of March. Then it starts, till about the middle of February. In the middle of February, it starts to warm up and get hotter and hotter, till one comes to the real hot season, which is March, April, May, and June. Then about early July, middle of July, there comes the rainy season, which lasts for 4 months. July, August, September, October. So during the rainy season, especially the 3 months when it's really rainy, July, August, September, till about the middle of October, then it was the tradition for all of the different wandering ascetics, religious community, spiritual communities, to cease their regular wandering and to settle down for the period of the rainy season. And the Buddha also made this a tradition for the Buddhist monastic order to observe what's called the Vasa, the rains retreat. And so apparently at this time, the Buddha and his own entourage of disciples are spending the rains retreat in Rajagaha at the bamboo grove. And for some reason, one of these, call it auspicious circumstances, all of these other famous teachers have come to Rajagaha to spend the rainy season. And so we have here now, the text is going to mention what are called the 6 famous teachers of the period. These are the 6 teachers who were the rivals of the Buddha, so to speak. So he mentions first, there's Purana Kassapa. We mentioned him last week. He was the one who taught the doctrine of non-doing, that even if one goes slaying everybody on one side of the river Ganges, one doesn't commit any evil. And if one goes on the other side giving gifts, promoting the welfare of the people, one doesn't do any merit. Okay, then there is Makali Gosala. He was the founder of the sect called the Ajivakas. And he taught a kind of doctrine of fatalism, that everything is predetermined, predestined, including bondage and liberation. Then there's Ajita Kesakambali. He was the one who taught the materialistic doctrine that the person, when the person passes away, the four elements break up and dissolve, and there's no continuation of consciousness beyond death. Then Pakuda Kachayana, who taught the doctrine of the 7 elements or 7 bodies that I spoke about last week. Sanjaya Belati Putta, who was something of a skeptic, who believed that it was not possible for human beings to arrive at any kind of definite understanding of truth. And then there was Niganta Nataputta, who is also known as Mahavira. He is the historical, let us say, the great teacher of Jainism. Okay, so all of these teachers were present around in the vicinity of Rajagaha, and Rajagaha was the capital of the state of Magadha. And so for this reason, many people were saying that it's a great gain for the people of Anga. Anga must have been a bordering province, and Magadha, the central province, that so many great famous teachers have come to live at Rajagaha. Maybe it would be a little bit like in contemporary times if we had rainy season and then maybe the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh. Well, not really that much. Maybe Joseph Goldstein, of course he's not a monastic, but supposing came to live and spend the rainy season at Carmel or Cold Spring. Okay, so those are the 6 rival teachers, and then also, of course, he adds, there is also this recluse Gautama, also the head of an order. The order here is Sangha, the head of a group and so on, the famous teacher of a sect, who's also come to spend the rains at Rajagaha. Okay, so now Sakuludayi raises, or in this discussion being recounted by Sakuludayi, some of them raise the question, some people raise the question, among these worthy recluses and Brahmins who are regarded by many as saints, who is honored, respected, revered, and venerated by his disciples, and how, when they honor and respect him, do they live in dependence upon him? And I have to confess here that my personal belief is that the discussion that's going to, or the account that's going to follow here, is a little bit like a staged account recorded from the standpoint of the Buddhists in order to depict the other sects in an unfavorable light and then show the Buddhist community, especially the Buddha, in a favorable light. It seems that biases and points of view are endemic to everybody, even venerable Buddhists. Okay, so some say this Purana Kassapa is the head of an order regarded by many as a saint. However, he is not honored, respected, revered, and venerated by his own disciples. Okay, now he's going to cite some evidence for this. Okay, one time Purana Kassapa was teaching his doctrine to an assembly with many hundreds of followers. And then a certain disciple made a noise. And I've seen scenes like this in Sri Lanka as well. Do not ask Purana Kassapa that question. He doesn't know the answer to that, but I know it. Ask me that question and I'll answer it for you. Okay, and so when this took place, then Purana Kassapa got upset, and there was a commotion taking place in the audience, And he waves his arms and he wails and he says, "Be quiet, sirs, don't make any noise. They aren't asking you. They're asking me, and I'm going to answer you." And then many of his disciples got disillusioned with him, and they left him, and they rejected his teaching, saying, "You don't understand your own Dhamma and discipline. We're the ones who understand it," and so on. They contradict him, they argue with him, they dispute with him, and they even dismiss him and say, "Your doctrine is refuted, we've proved you wrong, go and learn better, or disentangle yourself if you can." And so in this way, he concludes that Purana Kassapa wasn't honored and respected, not even by his own disciples. And he's even scorned by the scorn that some have shown, that his own disciples have shown to his Dharma. Okay, so the same thing is repeated about each of the other 5 teachers, Makkhali Gosala through Nikantanataputta. In the case of all of them, their own disciples argue with them, their own disciples think they understand their Dhamma better than they themselves do. But then some say, now they're speaking about the Buddha, who they call the Samana Gautama, the ascetic or recluse Gautama. He's the head of an order, the famous founder of a sect, regarded by many as a holy man. And he is honored, respected, revered, and venerated by his disciples, and his disciples live in dependence on him, honoring and respecting him. And now the speaker is going to bring forth some evidence for this. So he says, once the recluse Gautama was teaching his Dhamma to an assembly of several hundred followers, and then one disciple who was sitting in the audience just happened to clear his throat. You know, he must have had some phlegm in the throat. So he just goes like that. And then one of his fellows, his fellow co-religionists, nudges him with the knee and indicates, in order to indicate, "Be quiet, don't make any noise. The Buddha is teaching us the Dhamma." And so he continues, when the recluse Gautama is teaching the Dhamma to an assembly, even of several hundred followers, on that occasion there is no sound of his disciples coughing or clearing their throats. You know, it seems that this coughing and clearing of the throat, it doesn't indicate always that one has a sore throat or a cold, but sometimes it seems to be just an expression of boredom or disinterest in what the speaker is saying. So to distract one's attention, one clears the throat or coughs. It's quiet, okay. Okay, what comes next now is very nice. Okay, for then that large assembly is poised in expectancy. You know, they're quite eager, trying to anticipate what the Buddha is going to say next. They're always thinking, let's hear the Dhamma that the Buddha is about to teach us. Then he uses a quite vivid simile to illustrate this. I don't know if we see this in the US because production of honey usually goes on indoors, but in India it might have been done outside at a crossroads. So suppose there were a man at a crossroads pressing out pure honey, and then a large group of people gathers around him, they're watching him, poised in expectancy, wondering, I guess, when he's pressing the honeycomb, the honey comes dripping out from the comb into a bottle. I don't have experience making honey, but I assume that seems to be what it's suggesting. Anybody have any experience with making honey? Okay, so, but this image is very, very vivid of people just, when is the honey going to come out from the comb? And of course their mouths are watering. Is he going to give us all a taste of the honey? Okay, so too when the ascetic Gautama is teaching the Dhamma to an assembly of several hundred people, on that occasion there is no sound of any coughing or clearing the throats, but everybody is just listening very intently, wondering what's the Buddha going to say next. Okay, then another proof how the Buddha is respected by his followers. Even those disciples of his who fall out with their companions in the holy life, in other words, this is speaking about monks who fall out with fellow monks, and they abandon the training, please forgive this phrase, but abandoning the training to return to the low life. I don't think that's such a good translation, especially in English. Low life suggests like criminals gathering in dark dens in order to plan the next bank robbery or to distribute drugs along the network of amongst the network of drug pushers. But it means to return to the household life. Okay, so when these disciples abandon the monastic training to return to the household life, even they continue to praise the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and instead of finding fault with the Buddha and his teaching, then they usually blame themselves, saying, we were unlucky, we had little merit, we went forth into homelessness in this swakato dhammo, this well-expounded dharma, but we couldn't live the perfect and pure brahmacharya, holy life, through the rest of our lives. And so at least some of them, of course most will, after leaving the monastic life, will marry and become lay followers, undertaking and observing the 5 precepts, but some will stay at the monastery and become monastery attendants, serving the monks, or in the case of women, the nuns. And they continue to, emulate the monastic life to the best of their ability. But whether they become lay followers or monastery attendants, they continue to honor, respect, and revere the Buddha and his Dhamma. I mean, I've seen this in my own experience. I've known many who have been monks in Sri Lanka, elsewhere, and then for various reasons they leave the monastic life to return to lay life, but just about everybody that I know continues to remain as followers of the Buddha, and they revere the Buddha, and even look back to their days as monks thinking, oh, that was the happiest period of my life. Oh, I was so happy and joyful in that period. But just through, the play of conditions and my own karma, my own merits were not strong enough, so I couldn't continue. Even I know Jack Cornfield, who's now very highly regarded lay meditation teacher, Buddhist teacher. But I've heard him say that, oh, back in those days when I was a monk in Thailand with Ajahn Chah, this was the late 1960s, oh, that was the happiest time of my life. Okay, so this is Sakuludayi speaking. He's speaking quite high praise of the Buddha here. So now the Buddha, in a way, he's going to test Udayi, maybe out of his own curiosity, to find out how Udayi understands the minds of his disciples. What is the reason, he thinks, that the Buddha's disciples honor, respect, and revere him so much? And so he asks, here I'm on page 632, paragraph 7, he asks Udayi, how many qualities do you see in me because of which my disciples honor, respect, revere, and venerate me, and live in dependence on me, honoring and respecting me? Then Udayi says that he sees 5 qualities in the Buddha which are the basis for the respect he receives from his disciples. And these are the 5 qualities that he mentions. And you see that these 5 qualities, they reflect his own, maybe his own disposition towards an ascetic way of life, rather than towards a meditative or contemplative or liberative way of life. So he thinks that the Buddha's disciples respect and revere him because the Blessed One eats little and speaks in praise of eating little. Again, he thinks the disciples revere the Buddha because the Buddha is content with any kind of robe and praises contentment with any kind of robe. Third, because the Buddha is content with any kind of alms food and praises contentment with any kind of alms food. The Buddha is content with any kind of dwelling place and praises contentment with any kind of dwelling place. And fifth, the Buddha, or the Blessed One, is secluded, lives in seclusion, and he praises seclusion to his disciples. So those are the 5 qualities that he sees in the Blessed One. And he assumes that it's because of these 5 qualities that his disciples revere and honor him. So what kind of unifying factor do we see in these 5 qualities? What sort of binds them together? Or how would we sort of classify these 5 qualities? Contentment is, you say, the core of them. We have here, yes, 3 of them are directly concerned with contentment. That is contentment with any robe, alms food, and dwelling place. And then you could say the other 2 are sort of exemplifications of contentment, or maybe the pursuit of ascetic qualities. That is the first, eating little, not being concerned to eat sumptuous food in large quantities, and then going off into seclusion. But does Udayi pass the Buddha's test, so to speak? What do you think if you've read the sutta? Yeah, he doesn't, yeah. And now the Buddha is going to show him in the next few paragraphs why he's wrong, why he didn't pass the test. And he does this in the form of hypotheses. So he says, suppose, Udayi, my disciples honored and respected me, thinking that the recluse Gotama eats little and commends eating little. And now he says that there are disciples of mine who live every day, they just eat a cupful of food. I don't know what a cup was like in India in the Buddha's time. Maybe like a teacup. Probably so, yeah. Or even half a cupful of food. Or the quantity of food that could be put in what's called here a bilva fruit. This is in Sri Lanka, the belly fruit. Belly fruit is about the size of an apple, a slightly big apple, or the size of a good-sized avocado. So this would be all the food that they're eating in one day is about the size of the amount of food, probably rice and some vegetables that would be roughly equivalent to the size of an apple. Or even half a belly fruit, half of an apple size of fruit. While the Buddha says, I sometimes eat the full contents of my alms bowl, or even more. Now, if you've seen the kind of alms bowls that Theravada monks use these days, especially the monks in the Thai forest tradition, you think, oh my heavens, how much the Buddha must have eaten. You know, these Thai alms bowls could be about this big. But that's because the Thai monks from the forest tradition use the alms bowl almost like a shoulder bag for when they go traveling. They put their extra robe into the bag, their toiletries, and various other things. So it's not used only for collecting food, but also as almost like a suitcase for traveling. And even the kinds of bowls that we use in Sri Lanka are quite big. They can hold much more food than one person could normally eat at a single meal. And that's generally because, well, we don't get the bowl filled up to the top, but usually just about a quarter or a third of the bowl gets filled. And this is because when we go on alms round, often we're going to collect food for sometimes 2 monks, 3 monks. So if there's a monastery, say, with 6 monks living, maybe each day 2 will go on alms round, and they'll collect in 2 alms bowls enough to feed 6 monks. And so the bowl is somewhat big. But you know, the bowl that's used by the Taiwan, I don't know whether it's used in China, but I've gotten the Taiwan bowl, which I use now. It's about this big. So it's quite reasonable, but even to eat a full Taiwanese bowl of food, it's quite I've never done it myself. Usually even about a half of a Taiwanese bowl of food. So the bowls in the Buddha's day must have been quite small, not like the bowls we use today. Okay, so the Buddha eats the full contents of his alms bowl, even more, while some of his disciples are just eating a handful of food. So if the disciples were to respect the Buddha because of eating little, then they should respect his disciples even more than they're respecting the Buddha. And those disciples who are eating less than the Buddha shouldn't have any special respect for him. Okay, now comes the robe. Okay, suppose my disciples honored and respected me, thinking that the Buddha is content with any kind of robe and praises contentment with any kind of robe. But now there are disciples of mine they're called refuse rag wearers. This means that they make their own robes by going around and collecting discarded pieces of cloth. Usually they get these pieces of cloth by going to, where do they get them? Dumps, but a special place, not an ordinary dump. Yeah, exactly, the charnel ground. When bodies are discarded in the charnel ground, they wrap them up in these pieces of cloth, and they discard the body there. And so the ascetics of the period would go to the charnel ground and maybe with a knife and cut off strips of cloth, and then they would take them, cut them into patches, square, rectangular patches, sew them together, and then dye them the color. Usually they would use pieces of bark, pieces of wood, boil it all into a big pot to make a kind of brownish, orange-brown color, and then dye that robe and wear them. So these are called pangsukula, which means literally dust robes, or dust robes made out of dust cloth. Yeah, so it gives the explanation here. They collect rags from the charnel ground, from rubbish heaps or shops, and make them into patched robes and then wear them. But I sometimes wear robes which have been given by householders. You know, these would be robes which are made by professional tailors under the instructions of householders who want to offer robes. So the cloth will be fine, good quality cloth. The sewing job will be impeccable. It will be dyed a quite nice color, a uniform color. And so if the Buddha was praised for contentment with any kind of robe, then the real praise and honor should go to those disciples who were wearing the refuse rag robes. Okay, then comes the respect due to contentment with any kind of alms food. This is a little different from the first one, since it's concerned more with the quality of the food rather than quantity. Okay, so if the Buddha were to be praised or to be honored because he is content with any kind of alms food and praises contentment with any kind of alms food, then some of his own disciples should be praised and honored more highly than the Buddha. Because the Buddha has disciples who are called alms food eaters, pindapatikas. And this means that they make a vow not to eat any food which is especially brought to the monastery and offered to them. Or they make the vow not to accept invitations to go to houses to receive special offerings of meals prepared by householders. But rather they make the vow just to go from house to house with their alms bowl, collecting food which people will offer them at the door, and then they go either to a quiet place or back to the monastery and take their meal from the food that they collect on alms round. And some of them go on what is called, it's translated here, unbroken alms round from house to house. And it's a more rigorous practice than simply going on alms round. This is the case where you make the vow to go to every house, whether one knows that one regularly gets food there or not. So, say there's a street with, say, 6 houses, and you've gone for months to those houses. At house 1, 2, and 6, they regularly offer food. But houses 3, 4, and 5, they've never offered food. But whenever one goes on alms round, one stands outside house 1, people offer, you say, Sukhi Hotu is like blessings to you. Second house, people come out, they offer some food. Sukhi Hotu, blessings to you. Third house, you stand there, generating loving kindness. May these people be well happy. Maybe the people are going about their business. Somebody looks outside, sees a monk there, pretends he doesn't see them, goes back to their business. So you just stand there for a few minutes. May you be well, happy. May all your good purposes be fulfilled. Go on to house 4, house 5, you do the same thing. Then you go to house 6 and people come out and offer the food. And you say your blessing. And you do this every time. And then sometimes it happens, you might be doing this for a month. People in houses 3, 4, 5 have never come out. Then the last day of the month, you're standing there generating loving kindness. Then suddenly the door opens up and people come out with the food and make the offering.
Is that practice still, is this still practiced in Sri Lanka?
In Sri Lanka, for monks to go on alms round from house to house, it's not so common. In Thailand and Burma, actually what's become common because people expect the monks to be going on alms round at particular times. So instead of people being in their houses, they set up like little tables outside the house, and they'll have stacks of food on the table, and then the monks come by in the line, and then they give to the people who are going by. But for this reason, I only have experience with Sri Lanka, and I used to go from time to time alms round in Sri Lanka, but it makes it so much more enjoyable than if the people are already waiting outside with their tables stacked with food. Because some of my happiest moments in Sri Lanka were like maybe you're taking a walk through the countryside and you have the alms bowl, and it's getting to be the time for the meal. Maybe we take the food usually about 11, so 11:15, you see it's getting close. You just take your alms bowl, you find the group of houses, and the people there are not expecting a monk to go by because it's not done regularly, but you just stand there with the bowl, and then it's not like the West where people close their doors, close their windows, but because it's a hot climate, the doors are usually open, people are coming in and out. Sometimes if there's little children, the children will come out and play. And so you're standing there, and then the people suddenly, they catch the sight of, what's that at the door? Wow, a monk. And they regard this as a very valuable opportunity to do a meritorious deed. For them, yeah. And so they might have some food that they're already preparing for the middle of the day, or they might have some leftovers from the previous day, which they'll say, please wait, and then they'll heat them up, and then they come out, and then they'll offer. How long did I do the alms? You see, at the place where I was staying, which was for most of the time, it was in the forest, so we didn't go on alms round every day. We had a system worked out where there would be a monastery attendant who would use a bicycle to drive into town, pick up the food in these baskets and bring it back. But at a certain point, we observed the practice of going once a week, something like that, on alms round to the village, the people to the village to collect food. But sometimes when traveling, like sometimes taking like a walk through the countryside over several days, then just bring the alms bowl along, and when you stop at houses, then just go on alms round. And it's really very, very enjoyable. And then people will always ask you, like, Andrew, Heta is tomorrow? Okay. Andrew, Heta, what do you know? Venerable, are you coming tomorrow? Or Andrew, Hemadama, what do you know? Are you coming every day? Then I have to say, I'm sorry, but I'm just passing through. Can't come tomorrow. Okay, let us continue. Okay, so this was the unbroken alms round, where you go to every house without exception. Okay, so when they have gone amongst the houses, then they won't agree, even when invited to sit down. Sometimes people will invite them, please come in, sit down while we prepare the food. They'll say, we'll just wait outside. When the food's ready, you bring it and offer it. Okay, so that's what his disciples do, but the Buddha says, sometimes I accept invitations to the houses for meals, and I'll eat meals of good quality rice with many sauces and curries. So if my disciples were to honor me with the thought that the Buddha is content with any kind of alms food, then people should really honor these disciples of mine even more than myself, course, they're observing more austere practices regarding food than I do. Okay, then comes the practice regarding dwelling places. So suppose my disciples honored and respected me, thinking that the Buddha is content with any kind of dwelling place and praises contentment with any kind of dwelling place. But now the Buddha says that there are disciples of mine who are tree root dwellers and open air dwellers. This means that they make the vow or the resolution that they will not live under a roof, that they won't live in a dwelling with a roof, but instead they travel around the countryside, and at night they just go to stay at the foot of a tree. They'll get some shelter from the tree, and this is still done, or at least it used to be done till recently in Thailand. You know, the big problem with living in the outdoors is mosquitoes. So in the Thai forest tradition, they have this kind of umbrella with a big canopy, and then attached to the canopy is a mosquito net. So the monks who observe